So having discussed only the items as listed on the agenda, we would like to move back into open session. So I make that motion
I
to come
second.
back. And a roll call vote?
Aye.
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 Wonderful, we're back in open session. Item 9, the first one on the agenda is personnel matters. And unless there's something that I'm missing, I think that what we were talking about was what Ms. Kuntz discussed. Is there more to this?
Chair Galloway, that's correct. The presentation from Ms. Holtz and Ms. Kuntz was what would be covered by this agenda item.
Okay. So then moving to item B, status conference with Judge Browning.
Chair Galloway, this item is on the agenda for the board to discuss and determine what they would like presented to Judge Browning for the August 20th status conference, which will be the day-long presentation of the parties to Judge Browning, along with Dr. Ginger's presentation of the 298 data. And this will be the first hearing in front of Judge Browning that he's holding, as Judge Brack previously did, having all the parties address the court.
And what time of day is that?
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair, fine. It's at 8. Starts at 8:30. It's scheduled an all-day hearing.
And where is it?
Federal Courthouse.
August 20th.
So other than what we discussed earlier, did we decide that we were going to have that as part of your presentation to the court, right? The 257 discussion?
Chair Galloway, I don't believe you voted for that to be specifically presented at the August 20th status conference. I think you voted that it's the official position of the board.
Right. To convey that, I thought, though.
I don't think we made a motion. We decided to wait till we got here.
Oh,
If it's appropriate, I so move that we delegate this to Director Harness to present the board's position at the status conference.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any need to discuss, what was that, the 10th IMR? Was that IMR 10 that we just had?
We're finishing.
Chair Galloway, IMR 10 will be presented to Judge Browning most likely in November, because this reporting period doesn't close until the 31st, and then it takes a full 5 months for the monitoring team to assemble all of the data and then write the report.
So forgive me, then it would have been IMR 9 where we have the little hiccup because of board vacancies. Is there any need to discuss any of that?
Chair Galloway, if the board wanted to raise that as an issue for the judge's awareness, that's certainly your decision. There is no direction for what the stakeholders can discuss, given that this is the introduction of each of these parties to the judge in more of a face-to-face presentation. The actual monitor presentation will be exclusively 298 data.
Okay. The other things that are kind of ticklers in the back of my mind are the budgeting process and the agency not being allocated the funds to hire additional investigators. That's one. And then something else that we were just talking about tonight that slips my mind. The change in the ordinance. Is any of that noteworthy to present at court? And I'm looking for your guidance because I truly don't know.
Chair Galloway, I think those concerns, especially because they've been raised by other parties, certainly The issue with the dedicated budget is something that could be put on the judge's radar, along with staffing for the board, along with the ongoing broader issue and impact of complaints, complaint timelines, investigative timelines, and all of the discussions that come from those concerns.
Including the timeline of getting reports back for disciplinary action, the bargaining agreement with the APOA.
Chair Galloway, that's correct.
Thoughts? Member Van Deventer?
I don't have thoughts on that. I had a different question. so I
Okay,
can wait.
go ahead.
Okay. Will this be will you be presenting the request to extend the mediation program at this setting? Is that when that was going to happen?
Chair Galloway, Member Van Deventer, I think we could include that in our presentation to the court so that it makes the court aware of the status of the program, and then when we have the stipulation, then the court would be aware and would understand and would simply sign it, I believe.
Okay. I think that would be a good opportunity, following up with what we discussed last month.
Anybody else have any thoughts or questions about that?
I have a question.
Yes.
Mr. Harness, are you the presenter at this? Because in the past, board members have spoken. Actually, at one of these, our attorney spoke. So are you the sole presenter on our behalf?
Chair Galloway, no. I'm sorry, Chair Galloway, Vice Chair, fine, no. I am not the designated spokesperson for the agency or the board. The board can choose whomever to represent at this presentation. That's something the board can decide. I don't have the exact timing for when the letters, because there would be a letter of issue that would be presented prior to the oral presentation. I don't know whether or not that deadline will be before or after the August board meeting.
Okay, well, does it have to be voted on by the board if the board says if the chair wants to do it, then? I don't know how much even time you have. Do you have 5 minutes? What do you know?
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair, fine. Typically we've had 10 or 15 minutes.
Maybe something like this.
Doesn't require.
But this is not typical in that it's not presenting an entire monitoring report, which is 350 pages, which the monitor has to go through. This is simply a presentation of the data, the measuring matrix and data for paragraph 298 in the settlement agreement. So the monitor's presentation will certainly be shorter than it would at a normal presentation that we've been used to.
So if it's a getting to know you thing, if that's really the purpose of this and details on 298, is it better to wait for another time? Do you, in your opinion, for these issues? I'm just trying to, in my experience, when a staff person speaks to somebody in that kind of capacity like the judge, there can be a value in having the board do that as well, like the chair. Even just saying, introducing not only you, but the chair of the board as well. So that's something you all can talk about.
I'm happy to meet and greet, and then if you'd like, you and I can talk about further what should be discussed, if anything.
Certainly, I think, Chair Galloway, Vice Chair Fine, I think your concerns about this being the first initial meeting, there is a status conference our meeting on the 16th of July that Attorney Gooch and I will be at to introduce ourselves to Judge Browning. So I think that for the second meeting, Judge Browning is really going to probably want to get to work and find out what all the parties' concerns are.
And that's the one at the court.
That will be, yes.
So,
All right, if the board is okay with it, then Director Harness and I can discuss.
I just think it's important to introduce the board as well.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah, and anyone can go. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and in the past, we've had lots of board members go.
Yeah, I've gone to a couple for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
all righty. Moving on, item C on the agenda is board members' use of social media. Obviously, this came up due to the APOA's letter that was issued to the board, and the request that they have made. I guess the question is, first of all, do we feel as though we would like to implement a policy on social media usage by board members?
Well, I think that for me, I think it's part of a bigger discussion. And the one that I put on was the impartiality. So to me, that's the bigger conversation, and the social media in particular would be a lesser piece of that.
So do you want to flip those?
I would.
Okay. All right, and then, yes, I'm sorry.
We're going to flip?
I'm going to flip the order.
Do D before C, if that's okay by the board?
Why would we want to flip them? Can we just do,
Well, because I think I put the board member impartiality on the agenda, and I think that if we go into whether or not, or policy on whether the board can do social media, I think it's a subtopic of impartiality. And I think we should have the bigger conversation first, and then followed by the smaller one.
So, Ms. Gooch, do you want to kind of start then this conversation with First Amendment rights as well as the discussion about bias?
Chair Galloway, I'm happy to. Before we move on to those two items, I have a follow-up question about agenda item regarding the status conference with Judge Browning. It's my understanding that traditionally the board would submit a letter to the court in anticipation of these status conferences, and it's unclear to me from the discussion the board just had if it wants to do that for this upcoming hearing or not. We don't know whether you will have time, based on whatever deadline it will be from the court, to have a vote at your next regularly scheduled board meeting on August 8th or not. And in order so that you don't get left behind if you wanted to submit that letter, tonight would be the night, I think, to decide that. Of course, if the deadline is after the 8th, you would have an opportunity at your next board meeting to put that letter on the agenda to get finalized. But I just raise it from a timing perspective in the event the board would like to have something like that prepared to be submitted to the court, that your timeline may or may not work with your next board meeting.
And you're obviously talking about the August 20th status conference, not the July 16th one.
That's correct, Chair Galloway.
So we need a motion to submit a letter? I mean, how do you want that worded?
Do we want a letter is the question?
What was the last letter we submitted in this regard? I mean,
I'm not familiar
What was the
with it.
content?
Chair Galloway and Board Member Dr. Cass, the last letter that I submitted was when we had a lot of contentious questions about board member vacancies and the unfilled executive director position. It's my understanding that that is a bit atypical from prior letters that the board would send to the court in anticipation of the status conferences, that those letters traditionally had been more updates about things the board wanted to convey to the court, as opposed to items of contention that they needed the court to actually look at. It doesn't mean that you are precluded or limited in what you want to convey to the court. I simply raise it as a discussion item if the board is so inclined, so that you don't miss any sort of deadlines that may come out of the July 16th status conference.
Leonard, do you remember writing any letter like that? I don't.
Well, Tina wrote it, we approved
Well,
it.
If I can, it seems to me it's easier to solve this problem if we constrain it to, to something that we really want to do or have heard before the court, rather than leave it open-ended. So, I mean, it seems unless there's some burning issue that we want to bring to the attention of the court, and I haven't heard it yet, then do we even want to submit a letter? I mean, it's getting a little bit late to start making up things that we're going to put in a letter to, that we haven't thought about yet. So I'm suggesting that
What's
maybe
the
we-
downside of not doing a letter?
And I'm
It-
sorry,
It seems that this particular conference, as Director Harness pointed out, is different in that it's presenting data from the monitor, and it's not the entire gamut of reporting. Is that correct?
Chair Galloway, Member Dr. Cass. In the past, these letters have been concerns that needed to be resolved prior to the judge taking action. So recall that there were issues with the board being involved in policy. Recall those kinds of issues that were ultimately resolved prior to the judge needing to take action. However, they were issues that were brought to the judge so that the court was aware of issues that were being worked out between the parties. So
So we're in a different circumstance now. Yes.
Chair Galloway, Board Member, Vice Chair Fine, yes, a bit, but if there are concerns that the board has or issues that they believe need to be resolved that ultimately they may need the court to step in, then those would be the issues that you would want to proffer to the court so that there's an awareness.
so probably the majority of the things that we talked about are going to work themselves out. The one that I can think of that concerns me that may not work itself out all by itself is your funding and the ability to hire the staff that you need to do the job that you're tasked with. That would be, I mean, if we're going to write a letter and we're going to list things, that's the one that I can think of we would definitely want to have on that letter.
The four things you mentioned as we were talking about this were a dedicated budget, staffing for the board, investigative timeline, and extended mediation. Those are the four.
I think, though, I'm cool with all that, but I think that we should not submit it for this immediate hearing just because the scope is really limited. And I feel like we're going to look really silly if we raise all of the issues. So I would propose if we put a letter together that has many issues in it, that it be for the status conference that's much more open-ended and about the entire picture of reform instead of just the 298, which is the use of force reporting data, which is what this one is going to be on August 20th, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm good with not bringing everything to the table, but I do think that that one's one that we should get ahead of. I think that's one we should get ahead of. The staff's inability because they don't have enough investigators to do the job that they need to do.
I support putting that together, but just presenting it when it's timely is my suggestion.
Okay, and you don't think that that's a critical issue?
I think it's critical, but I just think it should be, we should present it not at the August 20th one, but what was the one that's just after that?
So there's one on July 16th. That's the hour-long one. And then there's the one at court. Yeah, I think maybe. But that's the one where they're going to do 298, if I understand you correctly.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
go ahead.
Chair Galloway, Member Vandeventer. I don't believe the status conference, the scope of the discussion has to be narrowed for the parties to 298. They're simply using the opportunity to present 298 in a public forum and allowing for a public status conference that they have traditionally had for monitoring reports, because this would be the first time that all the parties would appear in front of Judge Browning. So it's not necessary that you would need to narrow the scope of your discussion and or concerns for the judge to 298 issues, because this is the opportunity for you to come to the court that the parties haven't had in a year and a half.
Okay.
Chair Galloway, if I could also add just a bit of information. The next opportunity for the board to present anything to the court will not be until November, if not later. And so it may be that you all vote however it is you'd like. I also just want to remind the board that earlier discussion had to do with the APOA objection, and you guys tabled that for this item, and I don't know if the vote you took you want somehow conveyed to the court, but this would be your opportunity through this communication for this upcoming status conference.
That's a really good point. Thank you, Tina.
So do we want to,
That is our way
do
to
we,
respond,
do
I
we
guess.
want to hammer out what we want? What are the issues that we want to present to the court? I don't,
Yes.
we can do all of them. We don't have to do all of them, whatever we want to do.
I think we should do so.
So 257,
I propose.
general consensus?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, and if we can, I'd like to do just like a bundle vote of these are the issues that we're going to do. So I just kind of want to feel everybody out, and make a list. So 257, budgeting and staffing,
Mediation.
and investigative staffing, mediation.
Investigative timeline should go with the APOA.
Anything else? Do we want to talk about the couple of areas where we're going to be dinged, or do we want to save that for when?
Yeah, let's not
Okay.
anticipate.
So mediation, I'm sorry, you said something else?
The investigative timeline,
Timeline?
mediation.
Anything else pressing
I think
for
that's
anybody?
enough.
Okay, so Director Harness, you and I can talk about these, but the motion that I'm going to make is that we draft the letter informing the court that these are the issues: 257, budgeting, investigative staffing, mediation, and the investigative timeline, the bargaining agreement with the APOA be included in that letter.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I
Second.
second.
Oh, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great.
And just to clarify, the authority is delegated for you to finalize it with Tina and Director Harness?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Tina, for circling us back.
So this next stuff coming up, item C and item D, I would appreciate not flipping them because they're gonna get really conflated that way.
Okay.
And I don't
That's
know.
fine. That's fine.
Okay. So does this body believe that personal social media should be censored? Do we want to have a policy governing how we use our social media when it comes to items that we disseminate, that we may tweet, retweet, any of that? I mean,
I would be opposed to a policy that dictates what can and can't be on social media. I do think there are issues relative to bias and the importance of not being biased as a board member that would affect how you behave on social media, but I certainly don't think that there should be a social media policy that prohibits somebody from whatever they want to do.
Member St. John?
I also agree that, that's kind of pushing it, but I think that as a board member, we should remember to live by standards of what we post, what we repost, because even though, we're a reflection of the board and what we are designed to do and what we agree to do. And so all I'm saying is just, we just need to be really careful. But I don't think we need to do a policy. I think that we should have the sense to just to be careful.
Okay.
Can I ask Tina something? Does anybody else want to add anything right now? May I ask Tina something? Tina, in the ordinance, it talks about impartiality, and it mentions it several times. And I think that the whole purpose behind doing the dissolution of the POC in the past was because it became a free-for-all. And the task force, which Leonard served on, was put together so that there could be an unbiased vetting of issues between the community and the police department. And that was so important that the task force worked for a long time, city council worked for a long time to make that clear. And it shows in the ordinance now, and I'm sure you could quote what it says, but I think we all know that it says impartiality is a reason this board was put together. And this process of oversight was established. To the extent that we put our personal opinions out there in the community, whether it's with social media or op-ed pieces or anything of the like, I think that we made a promise as board members to be impartial and to be fair-minded about these issues, and that's the whole reason we exist. So if we put that into question via social media or op-ed pieces or anything else, by putting our own personal feelings out there relative to APD and this issue of this relationship, then I think we put at risk everybody on the board in terms of their ability to be seen as a fair-minded person. One of the issues we have, if we have any issue, any one of us, we could come to the board and say, I have an issue with this about APD. And I want to see what the board can go through policy. It can go through whatever. It can come up as a discussion item at the board meeting. And that's a way to vet this by the whole board. And that is fine as far as I'm concerned. That's a way of us weighing all the issues. It's very different than going out and proactively offering your opinion, whether it's favorable or not favorable. I would be as opposed to one side or the other because of its impact on fairness and our perception of impartiality. So to my way of thinking, that's what we signed up for. That's what we were vetted for, perhaps not as well as we should have been vetted, but that should be a major criteria for being on this board, is that you can take all the information and vet it fairly. You don't start out with the assumption that the police are always right or that they're always wrong. Somewhere you're going to look at the facts and you're going to take a look at that. To sell your personal opinion, whether it's on social media or any other way, is maybe your right to do so, but you do it at the expense of your credibility as a board member and the board's as a whole's credibility in the area of fairness. And so I would say that it is part of the promise we made to the city council that we would remain unbiased. Certainly, if there are people who feel so strongly that they want to do that out loud and on their own, they can do that. I think it breaks the promise of service to the board and to the community. And I think it's wrong to do that. And like I said, doesn't matter what your position is. If you are selling a position on your own about your view, you can either come to the board as a board member and offer that for the board's consideration, and then the board can vet that, or you cannot be a board member. I would say that there are some things that came out of this that I think, Julian, are really important in terms of vetting board members. You know, we have board members now who are saying that their avocation is to be an advocate, which is fine. I mean, I've been an advocate my whole life in other arenas. But that is not the place for this. It's not why we were picked to do this. And to the extent that we taint that, we taint it in our representation of the community. And I don't think that's right. I think that's a promise broken.
Okay. So just real quick, because it sounds like we've moved on to the impartiality thing.
Well, I just think
We're-
social media is part of it.
Sure, I get that, but it sounds like we've moved on. are pretty much in agreement that we don't want to develop any kind of anything officially governing the use of our social media. Is that correct?
No,
Okay.
I don't.
I didn't look at this side, but I'm assuming that's correct on this side too. Okay, so back to the question of board member impartiality. Tina, back to the thing about bias. Please.
Chair Galloway and Honorable Board, there are different ideas that I've heard expressed through the discussion tonight, and that is bias and impartiality, as well as the ordinance, and the ordinance that requires that board members have a demonstrated ability to engage in impartial decision-making, and that the amended ordinance now adds an additional layer, or I don't want to say additional layer, but it adds some more instruction that says any conduct inconsistent with the requirements and provisions of the police oversight ordinance or a demonstrated inability to objectively adjudicate civilian police complaints shall constitute cause for removal. So those are the ideas. The law looks at it a little differently, and that is that just because someone is a board member, they don't give up their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. And that is the intertwinedness of, yes, a board member has a different role, and they speak with a different elevated voice when they are on a board, but the Supreme Court has set forth a test that's used for First Amendment rights, and how is it that you balance the requirements of a board to act as a board and be impartial versus not restrain unduly board members' First Amendment rights. And the test is, as most legal things, a lot of gray area and a lot of weighing of factors. And it's from Pickering, and I can go through those factors if you'd like. I think that you all know what they are. Bias, however, is a little different. It's a completely different inquiry from a First Amendment and the balancing test of the interest of the board member making a statement versus the interest in the board and not having the statement made. It boiled down to its most elementary sense. With bias, it's a little different, and that inquiry has to do with whether someone sitting on this board should abstain from making a decision on a particular case or in a particular instance. And the law there is pretty clear in New Mexico, and it provides very comprehensive guidance. And what the law says on that is that reality counsels us against requiring that every decision maker start with a clean slate. That means that the reality is everyone has a history, everyone has their own personal experience, and the reality of that fact is that you can't find someone that doesn't have that type of baggage to act in a judicial or quasi-judicial setting. The law goes on to say an official is not required to recuse himself just because he has previously expressed support for a particular policy. Rather, a statement or position is generally disqualifying only if it concerns the specific proposal or action that is before the tribunal. And I will couch all of this with, this is regarding a hearing officer in a case that was adjudicated on behalf of Taos County, and it's case law that has to do with hearing officers, and the board is not, of course, the hearing officer, but you do sit in a pseudo quasi-judicial capacity, and I use that word lightly because I know that that caused a lot of contention during the amendment to the ordinance, and so I use that very carefully here. And then the case law for New Mexico goes on to provide a little bit more information, and it says, regardless of whether an official is actually biased, he appears biased when he expresses prejudgment of an issue in a pending case and will therefore need to recuse himself in most instances. A prejudgment or a point of view about a question of law or policy, even if so tenaciously held as to suggest a closed mind, is not, without more, a disqualification. In the event anyone would like to look at the cases that I'm citing, it's Las Cruces Professional Firefighters versus City of Las Cruces. It's a 1997 Supreme Court case. And then the second cite was from Carangelo versus Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Authority. That is a 2014 Court of Appeals case. And I think that no disrespect to our Supreme Court, but the New Mexico opinions are a little clearer for y'all on how to actually effectuate what bias is and is not. And it is, in my opinion, a very high standard for a particular instance. And it is harder or easier, if you will, to determine whether a board member has bias in a particular context when there is an actual case before the board, and if there is a statement or a position or a prejudgment that has been articulated in front of the board in that instance, that would be an opportunity for the board to have a conversation about whether or not it believes that whatever that matter may be rises to the level to constitute bias under New Mexico law that would require that board member to abstain from that particular decision. I think that answers the general overview of the difference between what the First Amendment rights are versus what bias actually looks like, and how they are different from one another, but they are all intertwined in some way, and that they do look to behavior, and they do have balancing tests for the First Amendment, whereas bias is much cleaner, easier to decipher when or if it should ever come up.
So the bias that we're talking about really needs to be limited to the work that we're doing here, and not a broader discussion of somebody's personal opinions or general feelings towards anything else. It really comes down to the matter at hand, and when we're looking at a case, whether or not bias can be accused or it's not a big discussion, it's very focused.
Chair Galloway, that is correct. Under New Mexico law, you look at the specific instance in relation to what the action is that that tribunal, board member, hearing officer is asked to take, and then determine whether or not it rises to the level of bias in that instant. That's correct.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that was proposed here that I find a little bit troubling is the idea that some of us were not vetted correctly. To me, that implies, number one, that some of us are better or worse than others. And I think we operate here as co-equals. And I also think it's unfair of us to argue that City Council should be looking through our Twitter accounts, our Instagram accounts, our Facebook profiles to see if there's anything that is potentially questionable. And I feel like you fall down a rabbit hole at that point because then it falls to council staff, maybe individual city councilors, to make that call. And then, you know, folks can argue over what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. It seems like we have a pretty clear standard that's been presented here, that if we're not tweeting or Facebooking about specific cases that are coming before the board, it seems that it's well within our First Amendment rights, and frankly, I feel just more generally, we're volunteers on this board. It's not fair to argue that we should be completely, as was stated, a blank slate. That's not who any of us are. I don't think that's who anybody expects we are. I think the expectation is through the interviewing process, through our personal histories and our interest in the subject matter, that we presented a case to City Council that we could be impartial despite bias. We all have bias. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. But can we be impartial when presented specific facts in a case and just look at that in a very clear sense? And fairly new to this, but I've been watching this process unfold for quite some time, and it doesn't seem that I've seen a lot of that infiltrate the specific cases or policies and that sort of thing. So I find it a little disheartening that we're considering setting that precedent, or asking the council to set that precedent, that we should vet members based on, I mean, essentially political beliefs or ideologies, and that seems like that just goes down a rabbit hole that no one wants to go down.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that given the amount of time and energy that is required to serve on this board, I think that it would be disingenuous to assume that anybody's going to volunteer for this without having a passion to do so in the first place, which is going to come with that. But the other thing is, all of the opinions that we may have personally are reflective of the community that we are serving. And we are a body of right now 8, not 9, but hopefully will be soon. I think that's what the balance is there for, why we have so many members as well. It's going to kind of keep things in check. So I'm in agreement with you. I think that this idea of being as a whole completely impartial to what's going on is not anything that can be done successfully. Member St. John? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Member Van Deventer.
I would just briefly, in responding to the content of what Board Member Fine said, state that demonstrating an interest in the subject matter does not constitute a bias. So, yeah, a bias is not constituted by expressing an interest aloud in matters of policing or the general work that brings us to this board. So I think that like the entire framing of that conversation is completely, it really misses the mark in my opinion, because I just don't think that, I mean, I know that essentially we're all talking about what we're not talking about, which is my op-ed, and I don't think that there is any bias demonstrated in that op-ed where I specifically am talking about what our mission is, which is to advance constitutional policing. That was the subject matter of that op-ed. So it does not in any sort of way rub against the work that we're doing or call our credibility into question.
So, Mrs. Gooch, so in regards to bias, if you were going after like a subject matter, a sheriff's office, APD or something, and your tweets or posts were against them, would that be considered bias? Or are you, yeah.
Chair Galloway, Board Member St. John, I think it would depend on what the circumstances were that that issue was coming before the board member and whether or not the tweets had something to specifically do with a case or issue pending before the board. So what New Mexico law says about whether a hearing officer has a bias that precludes it from him or her, and I use the pronoun he in the cases because that's just what the cases say, but it can be anyone. It's really more specific. It has to be directed at the issue in front of the board before it rises to that level. The Taos case that I was mentioning, it's an unreported case. It's fairly new. It's from 2018, and it was Nichols versus the Board of County Commissioners. The facts there were that 2 commissioners sat as in a hearing capacity, the way our city council may for land use, and they had previously come out with an opinion that was very pro-expansion of the Taos Airport. There was a zoning question before the Taos commissioners about whether or not something would happen with regard to expansion of the airport. And the court found that simply because one commissioner had on their Facebook page for reappointment said that they were pro-expansion, and that the other commissioner at some point made another statement that the airport expansion is important for long-term investment, that alone was not enough to disqualify them on a basis of bias from hearing a subsequent issue about the airport expansion. So I don't know that I'm not being a lawyer on you and answering your question without answering your question specifically, but I think the answer that you're looking for is it would depend, and I hate to have to say that as a lawyer, it's so cliche, but it really does depend. But the case law is pretty clear in New Mexico about when and how bias is shown and how it is a pretty high standard.
I want to clarify a couple of things. To my way of thinking, the purpose of having this oversight board is to, I'm sorry, my voice is going, is to build a better relationship between the community and the police department. That is its purpose. It is the heart of what we're here to do. Because there has been serious discord in that relationship. I think coming out public, this is my personal opinion, and it may not fit the boxes of your law books, but I believe that if you spend your time throwing eggs in the face of the people you're trying to work with, or flowers, either way, you are not being fair-minded. And you are showing that you're not capable of being fair-minded. And if you want to do that as a private citizen, rock on. But if you want to do this as part of this group, in my opinion, that's inappropriate. And everybody else can disagree. I just wanted to say what I thought.
Going back to the ordinance, and as far as impartiality goes, I believe you mentioned something about in reviewing cases and kind of making the determinations with cases. It wasn't an open-ended impartiality, is that correct?
Chair Galloway, yes and no. I mean, the ordinance 9-4-1-5B4, as far as what board members have to be appointed, it's the demonstrated ability to engage in mature, impartial decision-making. That is very broad. Of course, it is not a defined term. It's later in the ordinance where there's a discussion about removal, 9-4-1-5. It states, and if a board member engages in any conduct inconsistent with the requirements of the ordinance, or, quote, a demonstrated inability to objectively adjudicate civilian police complaints, end quote, that would be grounds for removal. As far as what has to happen under the ordinance for individual review of complaints,
Well, that's not an issue here.
no, it's not, but 9-4-1-8D1-3 provides guidance to the board about remaining, it's really where the CRC issue has arisen from, which is that a public meeting is where the discussions are supposed to happen. You're not supposed to make up your mind before you have all the facts. And it has a discussion there generally about remaining impartial in deliberations and decisions and abstaining from independent judgment until you've reviewed what's been presented in the investigation report. It has the typical no ex parte communication language that we had talked about with the policies and procedures. And then it says refrain from prejudgment until such times as all relevant information has been reviewed. So, and then it talks about when there's a conflict of interest and when board members should excuse themselves from a decision. And what it says is, and this is 9-4-1-8D3, board members shall, quote, recuse from any hearing in which he or she has a direct or indirect personal conflict of interest or cannot otherwise accord a fair and impartial review, or in which such member's participation would create the appearance of impropriety or partiality, end quote. I believe that's the language that you were looking for, Chair Galloway.
Yeah. Any other discussion points on this? Okay. All righty. Moving on to subcommittee appointments. I thought we should prepare, or I thought I should prepare in case we decided we wanted a social media policy. Since that's not the case, I'm going to pass these down to you guys, and I have a copy for you too, okay? These are the, they just need to keep going. Yeah, you've got one. Okay. These are the committee appointments. You can not worry about the ad hoc committee. These are the committee appointments based on interest that was expressed, I believe, Mr. Olivas and Ms. Armijo Pruitt and Dr. Cass. You three are the ones that are joining new committees. And Mr. Waits, I didn't hear anything back from you, so I kind of added you to outreach. I'm hoping that's okay by you.
That's okay by me.
All righty, great. The two of you, since we're not having an ad hoc committee, you can choose from any of the, well, either of the outreach or policy and procedure so that we don't have a quorum. But that would place everybody on two subcommittees. Do you guys have a preference? I think I was able to get you both on the committees you requested.
Policy.
Okay. Are you good with outreach? Awesome. All righty, so these are the new makeup, and I'm going to give this to you with my notes on it. Moving on to item 10 on the agenda is our cases. It's given our discussion earlier, my expectation that the case review committee is wanting to defer these cases to, I'm going to say,
The ones he wants to-
another meeting.
Do you have ones in this list that need to go forward because of discipline?
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair Fine, there are 2 that have already gone.
And are you going to tell us about them? Is that your intent? Are they on this list?
They are.
Okay.
Zero 48-19. The complainant complained how Officer L spoke with his daughter concerning an allegation of child abuse. The complainant wrote that Officer L went to his daughter's work instead of at her home, insisted his daughter committed the act and tried to get her to admit it. Since his granddaughter was to return in a custody exchange the next day, Officer L told Ms. Simpson she needed to agree to allow the father to retain custody of the child, and wrote that the officer was unprofessional and did not conduct a proper investigation. As it relates to Policy 2-923B3, officers will conduct a complete and thorough preliminary investigation and will write reports using the State of New Mexico Uniform Incident Report on all cases confirmed or suspected of child abuse, neglect, abandonment, or cruelty to children. The complainant claimed that Officer L was incompetent because she did not do a proper investigation to get background on the situation. Officer L called to the home of the child's father. The address was in the BCSO jurisdiction, so originally the call started with the BCSO officer. Officer L talked to the deputy regarding what he learned. The child's father showed Officer L past reports made with BCSO and CYFD. Officer L reviewed the reports available to her, tried to contact the mother, and then contacted Ms. Simpson for her side of the story. Officer L has more training and experience in child abuse cases than the average field officer. She contacted CYFD about the situation and her investigations. The CPOA finds that Officer L's conduct to be unfounded where this alleged misconduct did not occur. Personnel will treat the public with respect and courtesy. That was not sustained. But what we sustained was not based upon the original complaint. An initial report must be submitted at or before the end of the shift, except for the direction of the supervisor. Officer L stated that the call took a long time. On her overtime shift, she did not complete a report at the end of the shift, and she did not contact a supervisor for an extension. So we sustained not based on the original complaint.
Recommendation?
Discipline recommendation, written reprimand, and a suspension of 8 hours. There was also a violation for not recording or not reporting defective recording device. So second and a third class 7 violation within 1 year.
Member St. John.
Yes, I guess I'm at this point, I'm familiar with this case, I've read through it, so I'd like to make a motion to accept the findings and his recommendations.
Okay, and before we take a vote, Dr. Kass?
Yes, I read through the case too. I just wanted to, the discipline recommendations were within the matrix, I presume. I mean,
Chair Galloway, Board Member Dr. Cass, yes, this recommendation is straight from 346, the matrix.
Okay, so with a motion and a second on the floor, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great.
.072-19, complainant wrote he was seated in his vehicle talking to a friend on the side of the road. Observed 2 officers approach him yelling if they knew the people inside a residence. Complainant wrote repeatedly that he did not know the people that they were asking about and asked Sergeant L why he was yelling. Complainant wrote Officer E approached his vehicle, got in his face, and told him not to interfere with his investigation. Complainant wrote that he asked him again why the officers were yelling and cussing, to which one of them responded, "Because I effing can." Complainant wrote that his friend asked why they were being racially profiled. Sergeant L said he was darker than he was. Complainant wrote that he received their man numbers, but they refused to give him business cards. CPOA reviewed standard SOP 1-1-4D16 regarding Sergeant L's conduct. Police officers and department employees are expected to conduct themselves in a professional manner at all times. Personnel are discouraged from using any language that could be considered profane, derogatory, or disrespectful toward any person. In any certain situations, profanity may be acceptable, subject to review on a case-by-case basis. On that policy, we found the conduct to be unfounded. Personnel will treat the public with respect, courtesy, and professionalism at all time. On that policy, the CPOA found Sergeant L's conduct to be sustained, where the investigation determined that the alleged misconduct did occur. As respect to Officer E, we found an examination of both of those policies to be unfounded as it relates to Officer E. And the discipline recommendation.
Can I ask a question first? So the first unfounded is for swearing, and the second sustained is for what? I missed that.
Lack of respect.
Oh, okay.
The recommendations for Sergeant L, second class 6 violation in a single incident, suspension of 8 hours.
I have a question. I thought that the complainant's initial comment that there'd been, that the officer had commented using particular language was negated by the videotape. But this was also the case where this same officer is the one who was sustained on, the complaint was sustained on the basis of similar language. Is that right?
Chair Galloway, Board Member Dr. Cass, that's correct. There wasn't the specific language as alleged within the context of the complaint, yet we determined that there could have been more respect shown to the complainant.
Director Harness, did you say that was a 6th offense?
Class 6.
Class 6? Class 6.
Correct. Chair Galloway, Board Member Fine, yes. Class 6 violation.
And this is the first time or not?
Second.
And your recommendation is 8 hours, which is within the matrix.
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair Fine, that's correct.
I move that we approve it.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Do you want to continue and present 132-18?
You can't do 130.
We were getting presentations on the 2 that went forward because of
I know.
timelines.
I'm asking, are we going
Are
to
you
continue?
asking the board?
I'm asking everybody.
Okay.
Do we want to do this?
I'm not comfortable moving forward on the other cases based on
Okay.
all the previous planning at the CRC.
So then, okay, so then the next question is, do we want to wait until the next meeting to do these, or do we want to ask for a special meeting? I am inclined to request that we get these off of their plate in the CPOA office.
Oh, that's how we get around the ordinance before it's amended, is to just do a special meeting?
Have a
in this-
special meeting.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine, that's fine.
Director Harness tells me that we can do this as early as next week. All right, Director Harness, and I think, Tina, it's okay if I say I would like to have a special meeting to review these cases. And with that, I would ask board members to please review all of these so that we can have a meaningful discussion around them.
I
Do-
would suggest that we need a motion in order to, go on record that this is, that we're going to change the agenda.
I can do that. Oh, to change the agenda?
I mean, not change the agenda. Well, essentially, we're not dealing with the cases that are on the agenda, so
Fair enough,
If
we
we're-
can do that. So, Katrina, can you look at a meeting time sometime next week for us to do this? And with that, I make a motion that we leave the remaining cases in item 10 that have not been discussed, and move them to the agenda for a special meeting next week.
And is it the preference of everybody here to have a meeting that's at 5 o'clock? I know there's some people that work full-time.
I think there's a motion on the floor.
I just want to know about timing, so that Katrina can pick a time that will work for everybody.
I second the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then oh, you're opposed to having a special meeting? Okay.
No, I'm opposed to
Moving
moving
these.
past these cases and not dealing with them,
Okay,
which is what the motion was about.
okay.
I thought the motion was to have a special meeting
thought
to
for a
do
special-
it.
Well, it's to
meeting.
dispense this. I'm
like a
already
two-part.
calling for a special meeting. I'm doing that as the chair, to
Okay.
call for a special meeting, and then the motion was to move these cases to that special meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so. Okay. Three? Okay. Motion carries 5-3. All righty. And then Katrina, if you'll just let us know what our,
Katrina, excuse me, for the
That-
record, Katrina, the only days I'm available next week is Tuesday and Thursday in the evening. But,
Tuesday, the 16th.
yeah, the 16th or the 18th.
Okay, I can do that too. And anybody else not be able to do that?
back to her, to Member Fine's question, is 5 o'clock an okay time for
Yeah,
everybody?
that's fine, yes.
Okay, all right, wonderful. So that takes care of that. Item 11 on the agenda is the review of appeal for case 095-19.
I would move that we suspend this for the special agenda or special meeting, much like we did with the cases under item 10.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
I'm assuming, okay, motion carries 5-3. All right, item 12 on the agenda, serious use of force, officer-involved shooting cases. There's none listed. CPOA Board's review of Garrity materials. There are no cases. We have done item 14. Is there any other business?
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
Director Harness?
He has a written presentation. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would just, I'd like to recommend for case, since this has been going on for a while, for case 132-18, is so that we have a date and a time, if you could let the party know, that, you know, when we're going to have his case heard.
Chair Galloway, member St. John, it's already on the agenda and it's public notice.
Okay, so
I'm not
he'll know,
inclined
okay.
to start individually notifying complainants when their items are on the agenda.
Okay.
Any other business? Yes, sir.
I do have an item of other business. I just wanted to note generally to the board, reading the ordinance, we're supposed to be devoting 51% of our time or more to improving policy and procedures within the Albuquerque Police Department. I think that's really important because that's part of the whole reason this new board exists in its current form. It's because the old process did not work, and as members brought up tonight, that things devolved into places where nothing got done, and it was a little disturbing tonight that it seems like we spent the vast majority of our time dealing with matters that were not specifically related to improving the Albuquerque Police Department or the relationship between this board and this community and that department. And I think that's, some of that is out of the control of the board because some matters were brought before it tonight that we had to address. But I think going forward, that's really important that we need to do that and focus on that because that's why this board exists. And when the DOJ moves out of here, as they eventually will, this board is essentially that oversight. And I think we have to keep our focus on that intently. So I just want
It's
to
going to be
raise that
good
point.
to have you on policy and procedure, Eric.
I would say to you, when you're on the committee, and Bill has been on it the longest, I can tell you how much time he put into this is insane. And so you can't measure 51% of our agenda items here because there's lots of work that they do and you'll be part of as you go. So just so you know.
Any other business? Wonderful. Our next regularly scheduled board meeting is August 8th at 5 p.m. In the meantime, Katrina will get to us our special meeting and have that noticed appropriately. I move we adjourn.
I second your motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody.